The L15 weekly podcast on YouTube, giving you the latest news, views, and opinions from the football world.
Hello and welcome back to the L15 weekly podcast. Last week was the last week that we will be focusing solely on the Bundesliga. We will still talk about it in this episode and episodes to come, but that will be the final episode where we focus solely on the Bundesliga. But it comes with a bit of good news, which is that the Premier League is back and ready to go. The Premier League returns next week on the 15th, I think it is. 15th or 17th? 17th of June, with two fixtures, with Aston Villa and Sheffield United and Manchester United and Arsenal, and then a full round of weekend fixtures, midweek fixtures, weekend fixtures, and more fixtures, over and over again. But as the Premier League returns, we welcome another guest back. Returning to the podcast, we welcome my good friend Bish, who is just started a YouTube channel where he's doing gaming and all sorts of other stuff. He started two YouTube channels actually, and he'll be on later this episode. I think he's the midway point of this video. So if you're sticking around for that, obviously you can go and check out his YouTube links in the description below. But without further ado, let's get back into the Bundesliga. I mean, it's been a while since we've taken a look at the Bundesliga. I mean, over midweek, I didn't think it would be worth having a separate episode in terms of covering this. But the DFB Pokal, which is the German Cup, has been sorted out with a couple of big fixtures in midweek. One including what league are they in? I think they're God knows what sort of league they're in, but they are Saarbrücken, which are a team, and I couldn't even tell you where that is, but they are one of the lower divisions of Germany. I think they're the third or fourth tier of German football, if I look at their badge correctly, and they've knocked out Fortuna Düsseldorf on the way to getting to this stage in the competition, so they've obviously taken it very seriously, and they got knocked out, unfortunately, by Bayer Leverkusen, who came up trumps in that game when they won 3-0 against Saarbrücken. And then, of course, Bayern Munich on course for another double, beat Eintracht Frankfurt in the semi-final. They beat them 2-1, goals from Perisic and Lewandowski. So that sets up a nice final between Bayern Munich and Bayer Leverkusen on the 4th of July, I think that is when that's coming. So some good clashes there in the Bundesliga Cup, I'm going to call it that, but I know it's the DFB Pokal. But there's some big fixtures coming up this weekend as well, with a lot of relegation. There's the wooden spoon race game between Paderborn and Werder Bremen coming up next week. I mean, there were lots of clashes last weekend that caught the eye of mine, which included Leverkusen and Bayern Munich. But I don't think we need to talk about the Bundesliga in so much depth this week. I've been keeping up with it, but I don't think we need to talk about it in that much depth. But there are some good games, a game between Munich and Mönchengladbach. There's also a game between Mainz and Augsburg, and also some midweek fixtures coming up next week, including big games between Union Berlin and Paderborn. Also big game between Dortmund and Mainz, also Leverkusen Köln and Leipzig Düsseldorf. So there's plenty of big games coming up there before our next podcast, which will be next Friday at 5 p.m. So lots of very interesting games to be coming up. But we have to do a full top 5 league circle minus the French league, because lots of leagues are coming back, and tonight's game between Sevilla and Real Betis is one to watch in the La Liga. I mean, isn't it fantastic to have football back? I mean, it's obviously proved to be safe to do so. Obviously, I can't judge that, but it is pretty safe to do so. There's some big games. Barcelona kicking off against Mallorca tomorrow night at 9 o'clock English time. There's also the Athletic Derby between Athletic Club and Atletico Madrid on Sunday at 1 o'clock. There's a game between Real Madrid and Eibar at 6:30. Oh, isn't this just fantastic to have it back? I mean, I think La Liga are hoping to open doors to the supporters at the end of the year. I mean, interesting if that actually happens. I mean, it's very good to see a lot of these teams taking a bit of a risk. I mean, Sevilla and Real Betis are playing tonight. Let's have a look at that game. So Sevilla haven't lost in 6 matches. I mean, it's almost like starting a new season. I mean, me and Bish talk about it in a bit more depth later on in this episode. But it's a bit like starting off that new season again, where lots of teams will be fresh. I think you can expect a bit of unfitness to start with. We're getting into that competitive match routine, having them only been training for a little while. They've only been training since something like the start of June properly. I mean, obviously you'd hope that a lot of the footballers will be keeping fit at home, but obviously it's harder to do so when you're only at home and you're not at the training ground. I mean, the training ground comes as a motivation for players, and is almost makes it more of a job for you. But it would be interesting to see if these players will be just as fresh as when they left before the coronavirus pandemic struck. Having a look now at Serie A, which returns as of next weekend, so it is the last league to return, if you like, apart from the French league, which looks like it will probably never return, but there has been some movement in court about that. So there's some big games going on in the very good Serie A league, which has been very competitive this year. Some good clashes down at the top, up at the top really. With a lot of mid-table teams playing off against each other. Sampdoria versus Inter is the one that sticks out for me really, where Sampdoria are near the bottom and Inter are near the top. I mean, they are struggling at the moment, Sampdoria. Not like them. They're usually very good at keeping themselves afloat in that league, and they're very good at sometimes getting up and to near the European football mark. So interesting to see Sampdoria down there, but I suppose Serie A is another league to look forward to. We're going to be talking plenty more about that, and obviously the Championship, of course, my favourite league, coming back on the same day as Serie A. A couple of really good clashes in there as well. I mean, some big clashes. Fulham Brentford is the one that sticks out for me at 12:30. That'll be the one I'm tuning in for personally. Millwall Derby again. Teams that are around mid-table playing each other. My team West Brom playing Birmingham again, and the next Friday it's Brentford West Brom. So some huge games. Obviously, lots to look forward to when we think about it. It's obviously coming to the hopefully the brighter side of the coronavirus pandemic now, where we're sort of coming out of it. I mean, people are still unfortunately dying, but obviously if people keep following lockdown rules and keep doing all that good stuff and keeping themselves and others safe, obviously the death toll will go down. And we've got to look at the Premier League next week. So Sheffield United haven't lost to Aston Villa in the last 3 meetings, and Aston Villa have scored in their last 5 home matches. Aston Villa also have an average of 0.33 goals in their last 3 matches, and Sheffield have an average of 1.33. I mean, I think it's quite hard to talk on this episode, really, because a lot of these leagues are starting up for the first time again. It's almost like starting a new season, so form might not matter, but Aston Villa haven't won in their last 5 matches. Obviously, they ended the sort of break with a 4-0 loss to Leicester. Sheffield United beat Norwich. I mean, not that really counts for anything, because people will just be it'll be completely new. I mean, to a lot of people. Then Man City Arsenal will be another one later on that day. Man City have won the last 6 previous matches against Arsenal. Man City have an average of 1 goal in the last 3 matches, and Arsenal have an average of 1.33, so that's more for Arsenal there. I mean, Man City, I bet they couldn't wait to see the coronavirus come in, and, well, obviously they didn't. But you'd think with losing to Man United in that Manchester derby, I mean, hopefully people might have forgotten about that from a Man City perspective, but I'm sure the Man United fans won't have. Arsenal finished with a 1-0 win against West Ham. No fans will help away sides, is what Mikel Arteta says. And we can't really go into any more of those games, because next week we will be back covering them in the rest of the L15 weekly podcast in a lot of detail, as we usually would. So on this week's episode of L15 Weekly, I welcome podcast OG, and he came on the 3rd episode of the podcast. We welcome Bish onto the podcast. Bish, how are you?
I'm good, Louis, mate. I am very good. How is everyone doing?
Well, I mean, it's been a while since you've been on the podcast, hasn't it?
has.
You were one of the first people to come on, but since then you have embarked on an exciting adventure in YouTube. Bish, tell the audience a bit about that.
Yes, I am under the new alias of two channels. I run the Bish's FIFA channel, where I post some Ultimate Team videos. I currently have a series going called Time to Traore, and I post other draft videos and stuff like that. And then I've got my other main channel called Bish's, where I post like some challenges and some pranks when I get round to doing it. So yeah, all's fun.
Okay, so when this episode is finished, obviously, hopefully you'll all stay to the end. But once this episode's finished, there's going to be links in the description to both of Bish's channels that you can go and have a look at. So, Bish, your first question, when we get actually down to the Premier League stuff, which is, what do you think about the Premier League restarting?
Well, I think it's a brave move to get the Premier League started so early as they have. It's quite controversial. I think there are some positives to it. I mean, obviously, most of us football fans will be less bored in the evenings, and it helps bring a community together, obviously virtually instead of physically, complying with the 2-metre rule. But I think if the Premier League is brought back the way the Bundesliga did it, I think it would go really, really fluidly. There obviously could be some negatives if we don't abide by the rules. There could be more of an outbreak, but it's less likely of having another outbreak if we do go with how Germany did it.
And, obviously Germany did such a good job of that, and a lot of teams' form changed as the Bundesliga started. I mean, some teams that were in some really good form before the break, such as Schalke, are now looking at having their managers sacked after such poor runs. But can you see the Premier League table drastically in any way?
I think there could be some changes with some of the positions of some of the teams. Obviously, some teams were hit more drastically. They had more. The outbreak had more of a drastic effect on some teams, like Leicester, Brighton, and Bournemouth were hit quite bad. I know Leicester, out of all the teams, were hit quite bad. And we could see, obviously, Leicester are quite high in the table at the moment, currently sitting third, just behind Man City. But I think Leicester could drop down in the table. I'm not sure about Bournemouth going further into relegation than they already are. I think that Bournemouth's fate is already set for them. It would be a shame to see Leicester drop down the table after everything they've done so far in the season, but I think maybe they could use this to spur them on. Maybe a bit of backing from the fans could spur them on and even have a better half of the season. May even push past Man City into that second place.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of movement could happen both at the top and the bottom of the Premier League table. And a lot of players, obviously, coming back into a different environment behind closed doors. Which players do you think could come out of their shell after this long period of not playing any football?
I reckon there's some players maybe down the bottom of the table who will help use this to fuel the second half of the season. We could see a slight push from some of the Norwich lads, like Todd Cantwell. He started off the season really well. I hope to see him finish it really well. I mean, as a Wolves fan, I do want to still see Villa put some sort of fight. I wouldn't like them to go down because I do like a bit of local rivalry. I'd like to see the Villa team push out of those relegation places. But I also like to see if the hype still stays around players like Bruno Fernandes, who came in to Man United just before all this happened. I think it was about 3 weeks before this happened. He had a lot of hype around him and obviously performed really well. So I want to see if the hype still stays around Bruno Fernandes and see if he can use it to push on for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, Bruno Fernandes is a player that's been very, very hyped by a lot of Man United fans, despite him only playing a few games. I mean, he was included in the BBC Team of the Season after playing a few games. But with the top four, Bish, how do you think that's going to play out? Like, your prediction for the top four?
Well, I think Liverpool's title win is inevitable. I don't think that's going to change much. But I have dipped Man City to stay in their second place. I don't think Leicester are going to take over them. But I have put Chelsea in third. I have put Leicester dropping down to fourth. I think they will be hit slightly by a few of their problems that they've had during this lockdown period. I think they will drop down into fourth.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a miracle that Leicester are so high. I mean, I think a lot of the top 6 teams dropping off, such as Tottenham and Arsenal, not doing so well this season. I've gone for a slightly different approach to my top 4. I've gone obviously up top. It's going to have to be Liverpool. There's no other way around that. I've gone for, in second place, Man City. In third place, I think Leicester are just going to about stick with it. And then in fourth, I've gone for Man United. I think that return of Paul Pogba, hopefully, if that's going to happen, will be like having a new signing, and I think that they'll be able to hold up there.
Yeah, I think that could be a good shout, actually, Man United. Especially if the hype does stick around Bruno Fernandes, like we said before. I think they could push for that top 4 place. Yeah, that's a good shout, that is.
And obviously, as I said, lots of movement could happen around the bottom 3. Obviously, it's been a difficult season financially for a lot of teams with no revenue coming in for the past 3 months, and staying up is all the more important for finances now. So Bish, how do you think the bottom 3 is going to play out?
Well, I have had a few changes down my bottom 3. I did do 3 little drafts down on my bottom 3, but I will read out my final confirmation for my final 3. I did put Norwich down bottom. I don't think there's going to be any change there. I think they're too far gone, to be honest. It's a shame.
Yeah.
Norwich did start out very well, but I have tipped Norwich to drop down in 20th place. I have put Bournemouth to replace Villa in 19th. I think just Bournemouth have been hit quite bad. I've obviously gone down the route of which teams have been affected badly who are around that relegation place, and I have had Villa saved, and I've put Watford in the last relegation place. I think Watford, I know they got their win over Liverpool, but I still think they could be in for a fight. I think Villa will be up for it.
Yeah, well, I've gone for a very similar approach to yours with my bottom 3. I've gone for in bottom. I've gone for Norwich. I think, as you said, it's inevitable that they're going to go down really with Norwich. I mean, they play some really nice football, and I think it's quite brave of the manager Daniel Farke to keep playing some nice football. But I think sometimes they lack a bit of defensive organisation, which you really need when you're fighting down the bottom. I've also gone in 19th place. I've gone Villa. I mean, I'm a Baggies fan, and I think they may end up facing the drop. I mean, they hadn't won for quite a while before the season break, but this starting again may bring it's almost like a new season. So Villa may be able to come out the shell and maybe fight for survival. And in 18th place, again, as you said, I think Watford are going to be dropped in it. I think Bournemouth, I know they've been hit quite badly, but I think maybe they may be able to just wriggle out of it. I think even if Bournemouth were to go down, I think they'd come straight back up.
Well, I as a Wolves fan, I have put Villa out the relegation zone, which is quite controversial. But you never know. You never know what could happen.
Yeah, it could really go either way. So, Bish, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
No worries,
it's been
mate.
a pleasure having you again. And obviously, if you want to go and check out either of Bish's new YouTube channels, you can. They'll be down in the description below. Maybe go and give him a subscribe and go and have a watch of his content.
Well, thank you, mate, for having me. It's been a pleasure to be back.
Absolute pleasure. So thank you very much for listening to this episode of the L15 Weekly podcast. A bit of a shorter one this week, as I feel there wasn't much we could talk about, because there's only a couple of games and a couple of leagues coming back. But next week we'll be doing an in-depth analysis of all the Premier League football and all the EFL football that's coming up and has been. So thank you very much for watching. Obviously, Bish's YouTube channel will be one that you can go and check out. Obviously, you can go and have a look at those with the links in the description. And thank you very much for watching. It's been a pleasure having you, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye.